Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Aspen Family Business Group webinar. We're very happy to have you here today. Our topic is family dynamics, and Natalie McVeigh and Donnel Nunes will be talking you through some complexities of working with family and getting along with family in your family business. Briefly, before we start that, I want to just let you know, Aspen Family Business Group, as most of you are aware, we have recently transitioned to a nonprofit. That's because we want to serve all family businesses more broadly, no matter where they're located, no matter their financial means, no matter who in the family wants to be participating. We are making resources available, and we're doing that through webinars such as this, through our monthly coffee, which is a drop-in opportunity to have a conversation with Leslie Dashew, one of the original founding members of the Aspen Family Business Group. We also have a great online library of resources on our website, which is going to be launching very soon, so stay tuned for that. And also launching very soon is our conversational AI coach named Sam. And that's a place you can go to real time with your questions and get solutions and answers. And this chat bot is not ChatGPT. It's not out there on the World Wide Web. It has been created through carefully curated materials from the Aspen Family Business Group, almost 40 years of history. So we know that the resources you will be getting are reliable through that. I want to let you know for today's webinar, we have the Q&A feature enabled. So at any time, if you want to ask a question, just put it in the chat, and Natalie and Donnel will be able to get to your questions either during the webinar or towards the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie and Donnel. Thank you, guys, and thank everyone for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. It is sometimes the case I had a little bit of a slow arrival onto the Zoom call this morning due to an update. Today, what we're going to be doing is talking about a topic that really seems to be at the core of all family businesses, and that's conflict. And what Natalie and I are going to be doing today is guiding you through some information and dialoguing, hopefully with some input from you folks as well about this topic, and exploring it not as something to be feared or avoided, but more as like a natural part of any family working together, especially where there's an overlap in the business needs and the family needs. And as we jump into this, I want to really highlight that healthy families are not characterized by the absence of conflict, but rather how they respond to it. And the ability to face disagreement directly, respectfully, productively is really what strengthens family bonds and helps to build durable relationships as you are moving forward. In contrast, when conflict is ignored or mismanaged or avoided, it tends to resurface in ways that can be damaging and really erode trust, impact communication, and prevent families from gaining alignment. Quote that I mentioned in a prior webinar that I really love when it comes to conflict, and it says that if you're not talking it out, you're acting it out. So, Natalie, what would you add to all of that for our discussion today?
I think all of what you said is incredible, Donnel. And, it's not even healthy families, right? Some of you may say we're not a family business. It's just, me and my spouse, or me and my brother, and our kids aren't going to come in. It's when there's more than one person, there's some inherent disagreement. In fact, some of us even disagree with ourselves, right? I want to go fast, I want to go slow. And that tension between those two ideas just helps me think of a different way to get there. It's only complicated because when I'm disagreeing with myself, I give myself the benefit of the doubt. When I'm disagreeing with someone else or they're disagreeing with me, I might not give them that benefit of the doubt. And so I was doing a different workshop this morning. I'm actually at the site I was at, and I remember one person raising their hand, and he said, I don't act honestly with some people because I'm afraid of that confrontation. And if you think it's going to be a confrontation, it will. If you think it's a conversation, then it will be. And so our hope is that we can create a conversation differently than you have had in your families, that are about these things that become sensitive.
Yeah, I love what you said about the internal conflict and how we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, but don't always do that for each other.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on you, Donnell, a little bit. I know you and I do love you, and you did have some tech problems getting on. If I were in the same position, I would, give myself grace. But if you and I had tension about something else and you had a tech problem, okay, now, like Donnell, that lazy guy or that guy who can't figure out whatever, it's not whether you were late or not. It's what I decided to attribute to that behavior. And you weren't, you actually showed up right on time. But the point is, that's the difference. Same action, same person, myself or you who I like, or a different version of you who I maybe don't like.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So let's start this off with talking a little bit, getting some input from folks who are watching right now. If we can go to the next slide. When Natalie and I were putting this workshop together, one of the things that we talked a lot about is this perception of conflict being scary. And we wanted to ask folks who are on with us right now, just take a minute or two and put something in the chat about your response to this question here.
And if
Natalie,
if you want to be anonymous, you can drop it in the Q&A. We'll still get it. But throw that one word of gut reaction with why conflict feels scary or uncomfortable for you.
yeah, and while they're doing that, Natalie, how does this reside in you, in your life, in your experience, in your relationships?
Yeah, it's a good question. I unfortunately or fortunately have no fear. And so one of my really good friends said no is the start of a conversation. I still think about that. I get excited when people seem to be getting annoyed. Not that I'm out there driving you nuts, although some of you, I've seen some names that are familiar here, like you do drive us nuts. But I know that it's important when it feels like we're just not on easy street. So for me, it doesn't feel scary. It feels exciting, because usually that stuff that feels tense is the stuff that matters.
It's interesting because, like, one of the things that I've said to a number of my clients is, even though this is what I do for a living, it doesn't mean that I don't have my own version of scary conflict or my own version of needing, outside support in really complex issues. And sometimes I think it's like with conflict, if we're in a heated discussion with someone who we really love and care about, there can be these moments where it almost seems like you're sitting at the precipice of, that relation being changed in a way that might be hard to recover from. Sometimes it's like, can this person accept this, inner part of me in a way that we can move forward, or will I be rejected? There's some comments coming in, some words. There's unpredictable because of cutoffs in family history. And I'm assuming that is talking about where relationships have been fractured, don't like confrontation, unsure if a resolution can be found. Sometimes conflict can get worse before communication gets better. Not sure how emotions or tone of conversation will go. It appears, Casey, our chat function is disabled.
So everyone, you can just drop it in the Q&A. I think we do that for anonymity. So just use the Q&A as though it's the chat, and we'll read it off. 100% agree with you, Donnell. We really want to belong, and we want to belong in our family. And so that's why we're talking about family businesses. That's why the stakes seem higher. It's okay if the stranger doesn't like me, although some of you are people pleasers and it bums you out when a stranger doesn't like you. But it's when someone I should trust and do love and care for, like a partner or a sibling, I'm not going to say anything, because what if when I say it, they feel like they don't like me anymore. They don't like that feedback. And that comment that someone just said is the conflict may get worse before communication gets better. The research says the opposite is true. Unaddressed, makes it more intense, makes it worse. And so we have this visceral reaction to go away from it. And that actually makes it bigger and scarier and less addressing of these things. It also stops the person from the ability to modify their behavior. So I'm going to stick with a simple one because it comes up with all clients. And you really weren't late, Donnell, but I know you can handle it. But in a world where he's late all the time, chronically, and I feel like it's disrespectful, and that's what I say is the impact on me. And he's been disrespecting me for 10 or 20 years, but I never say it to him. I say it to my sister. who also thinks this is a disrespectful behavior of his. Every day he's coming in late. He doesn't know it bothers us. And so actually that unaddressed tension intensifies.
Yeah, you miss the opportunity to correct your own behavior that you're not aware maybe impacting others in a negative way. Yeah. There's a couple more comments and then I want to, move us into the next slide, but it's difficult to lead with logic while also navigating emotions and fear of offending. And so one of the things, as we transition into the next slide, one of the things I really always love about our conversations, Natalie, is that you have this wonderful way of attaching these struggles that people feel in family business to concepts like this one, like a definition where once you can name what something is, it sort of declaws it a little bit. And you've told me a bit of how this particular definition is meaningful to you. And I wonder if you could share some of that with the people who are joining us today.
Yeah, I remember hearing this in 2012 or 2013, the idea that it's just two ideas holding the same space. And that's true, right? All innovation, all new ideas came from this thing isn't working. Doesn't make us bad, doesn't make us good, but we're moving forward. And this also lends well to that comment about difficult to lead with logic while also dealing with emotions. We tend to have binaries, and typically speaking, everything is emotional. We do have two synapses in our brain. One is electrical and one is hormonal or chemical. But believe it or not, in January of 2024, we found out that electrical synapse in our brain has a hormonal tail. It is all emotional. Some of us, however, add the layers of affect onto the emotion that's happening. So emotions aren't bad in particular. Logic isn't bad in particular. It's how we find the place that those meet in the middle. And we can talk about other dichotomies that technically don't exist. Left brain, right brain, that's made up. That's not a thing. All of that is saying these are two wonderful, great ideas, two sides of the same coin. And how do we actually get to spend that money, right? That's what a coin is. It's a currency, and it doesn't really matter if it's top up or top down. And so hopefully if we can approach the situation like that of, okay, I want to know what's on the other side of this. It's really, really helpful to be able to go in a more curious, inquisitive way.
Yeah, and when I look at this definition, I also go back to something that you said just a couple minutes ago about the idea of it, of conflict existing within ourselves. And so there's almost like these layers of ways that conflict can manifest itself from the individual to the organization. And so it could even start, an example of this is as a member of the family business ownership and leadership team, conflict of being loyal to a family member, maybe a parent or someone in the senior generation, versus being loyal to their responsibility to the business that can happen inside an individual. And then I've seen it where that individual may then have siblings who are part of the ownership team who trust them and their business acumen, but then find themselves in conflict as to whether they support their sibling or the parent who's still the owner. And when those things don't get resolved and are chronic issues, I've seen that move into the organization where employees don't know who they're supposed to listen to and run into that kind of conflict as well.
Absolutely. There's a great old book that most of you don't have time to read, but it's called Invisible Loyalties, and it talks about that. And one of the things I love to do, whether you're addressing the conflict or not, your body betrays you. We know whether you're frustrated or not. And so everyone is aligning behind closed doors. And so one of the things that we do with clients sometimes to illustrate that is have a ball of yarn and actually say, okay, on this big thing of whether we pay bonuses or we pay dividends, right? Again, that dichotomy, or whether we're rational or emotional, where are you on the string? And we follow that string to show that you thought we didn't talk about this thing, but in fact, our actions are still saying we're addressing it. As Donnel said earlier, we're acting it out. And so conflict is catchy, right? Just like the resolution can be catchy. And so we're either dealing with it or we're making sure that it's the undercurrent. There isn't really this idea that if we're not talking about it, it won't happen.
Yeah, you remind me of another idea that I think is really important. And sometimes when a person feels like they're the only one with the desire to move a family forward in terms of the way that they're communicating with one another and managing conflict and feel they're, at odds with the rest of the folks or the other folks don't want to engage, is at any point in time, each person as an individual in the system has the potential to influence healthy responses to the challenges being faced or to go and insert things that are not keeping things moving forward. And so there is an impact, and it does sort of like feed through the system from the individual all the way up to the sort of organizational cultural level, depending on our choices.
Yeah, and someone put in the comments, a family history of avoiding conflict. Avoiding conflict is actually a conflict strategy. It's just not the most effective one. Neither is yelling in each other's faces. And so this is why I love this is so useful, Joe Paul's tool of engaging with that. Avoiding conflict is bad conflict strategy. Yelling at each other's bad conflict strategy. There's something in between we can collaboratively find that works out really well. So we are training people. We're training them through our words and we're training them through our actions about what this family tolerates. I'm a nerd, and you all probably know that already. But in a world where I'm a nerd, I love words. I like the root and meaning of words. And most of them you can debate till you're blue in the face of what the origin is, what language, etc. But there's only one word we don't debate. It's origin. And in fact, we don't debate its origin, we don't debate its meaning, and we don't translate it in most languages. I'm not going to bother to ask you what it is. I'll tell you it's taboo. Taboo is Polynesian, and it means that thing we do not talk about. And that's how most of our families deal with the view that if we talk about it, it's going to get worse. But the research bears out that if we don't talk about it, it absolutely will get worse. And so naming those things, we have a place to move once we do it.
Yeah, Natalie, let's go into the next slide. I think Casey's running the slides for us. Yeah. And and anyone who's on, please continue to put stuff in the Q&A. We've got it open and we're looking at it. And I saw someone write too much baggage. But Natalie, this model here, the iceberg, I think we've all seen this image or something similar relative to like interpersonal dynamics before. You mentioned to me that this one resonates with you. You have sort of a personal connection to it because of your dad. Would you share that?
Yeah, my dad was a submariner. He was in the Navy for 30 years. I get fascinated by things. So people always use this iceberg analogy. And so I asked my dad, I was like, what's your experience with icebergs? And he's like, they're really dangerous. And I was like, yeah, haha, like Titanic days. And he's like, no. He's like, because they are very deep before they come up. And so there are lots that aren't very visible. And what icebergs do specifically to sonar is they can at times be masked. It doesn't happen as often now, but early in my dad's career, whether it was a surface ship or a submarine, there were on average 3 accidents a year, not all catastrophic, of icebergs. And so, yes, it's a silly analogy, maybe. And yes, we think we're very far from it, but my guess is if you Googled it, there was at least one boat this year that hit an iceberg. And it's because they're so heavily loaded under the ice. And they're also really magnificent when you see them when they break and things like that. And so one of the things with family conflict is we tend to address the symptoms and not the root cause, right? I might say it's because my brother's paid too much, but really it's often because I've always felt that my brother has been favored more than me over the years. But that seems silly to say. That doesn't seem like a business decision because we can equalize the pay, but we might not still feel better about it.
Yeah, there's a leadership development program that I've worked with for a number of years, and we use an iceberg model like this that has 4 levels. And we have the level 1, which is, the task or the problem, the level 2 methods or procedures. And then there's a level 3, which is sort of a call to action in effect. That is where we say leadership happens. And that is where somebody is paying attention to the process in a group that's addressing an issue. And if it's not being solved by knowing the problem the task or the problem, and it's still not being resolved when you know the appropriate method or procedure to address that task or problem, then somebody has to step back and say something else is going on here. And that's where the leadership comes into it and has to then transition into exploring what are the interpersonal things that might be getting in the way.
Yeah. And I just want to layer on top of that, Donnel, because it's a really useful model. One of the things we've studied with this as well is interpersonal conflict doesn't happen out of nowhere. So likely it was one of the other two conflicts left unaddressed long enough. So
Yeah.
I'm a slow person. You're a little bit of a faster person. You assume that I'm being slow to hold you back. Right now, after many, many years of us working together and us doing that, you now have a problem with Natalie. Every time we get assigned to work together, you're just wringing your hands of like, we'll never get this done. And so I agree that fourth level is, hey, let's step out of the conflict. Let me find where I own it. But you can actually write these 3 levels down now if you want. What are we working on? That's when we say, and we talked about it in the last webinar we did, are we all rowing in the same direction? Do we have a mission that we know about? Are we going, our true north, whether it's southwest or not? And if we don't know that, let's fix that quickly, because too many times when you and I are going the wrong way, when we don't know it's the wrong way, might mean you and I don't like us. If we're clear on that, then we need to say, is it that we don't have enough structure? Is it the pace that's not working? What are these other things? Like I said, just me being slow and him being faster, so that you can tease it out. So what I encourage my clients to do when they write those 3 levels is think of your last conflict, insert in that person who bums you out the most. And write their name down and try to figure out where on level 1 and 2 this relationship went wrong. And so when you go to talk to them next, you realize you don't just dislike them, although it feels like it right now. You dislike that behavior that they're doing that impacts you in a way that a slow person, when someone's trying to go fast, feels like I don't trust you, feels like I don't think you have it right, but I need to go slow. I don't just do it to Donnel, I do it to everybody else in the world. And so when we can start seeing that pattern of behavior, we can start finding out that maybe you aren't a nuisance, but this behavior impacts me in this way. And then I can have that conversation with you. And you can then explain yourself, and we can find this understanding. We can find what's really underneath the iceberg. And it's not that we just hate each other.
Yeah, Natalie, when I hear you talking about it that way, so I had a little bit of an epiphany about the model I was talking about. So we use that model because we're specifically working on leadership development, and we're trying to call that out as a step to initiate thinking when people run out of the objective ways to resolve something, creating the solution. What do you go to? But I could almost imagine there being a circle around this entire slide, and that circle is leadership. And that when you sort of start with that idea of leadership going into approaching this, that's mapping these 3 things out from the get-go and taking that as an assumption that that's part of it.
Yeah, that's how we self-lead in these families. The exhausting thing about this, and I'll jump to the punch, is yes, it's on you. You're going to be the first person, probably. You're here at this webinar who's going to go in your family and change this conversation around conflict. But you have to be willing to tease it out for yourself. Half of our conflict is our internal conflict. And so if we can sort out that I really don't dislike my sister or dislike Donnel, I dislike these behaviors, then we have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And that's why we always say that structures are a proxy for trust, because at least if we know where we're going, it's going to feel a little better than accidentally flailing our arms and hitting each other.
Yet having a focus on what is right rather than who is right.
Absolutely. We can put the problem on the other side of the table. You and I are unfortunately in different places, so it looks like we're opposite each other, but ideally we're sitting right next to each other, and what's opposite us is the challenge we're tackling together. We can start coming together around the lack of structure, the miscommunication, the wants and needs that are unaddressed, that we might both be feeling in different ways.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next slide.
Absolutely. We just got a question, and it says, how do you work within a system that has participants that are not working on growing personally, able to come to the party with a willingness to work things out? it does start with you. You know, we say in neuroscience, you have to name it to tame it, and you can become an emotional contagion. You can either become that emotional chaos or that emotional calm. I believe everyone is working on themselves and they're trying their best every day, but everyone's view is limited. Dr. Tasha Urich has some lovely insight on self-awareness, where 85% of us think we're self-aware. Statistically speaking, that's not everyone on the call, but actually 10 to 15% of us are. We all have our own lacunas or our gaps. Some people call them blind spots that we just don't see. So when we're family, we don't see the changes. If you've ever gone to a reunion, your friends from a reunion 10 or 15 years can tell your hair gray and maybe that you've gained a few pounds or lost a few pounds, but your family doesn't, because those changes were small. So the first thing is I would be curious about what ways are they working on themselves, even if they're not the same ways as you are. And what I can tell you about pattern interruption is you have to do it enough before other people see that you're doing it. We have these little hooks we're walking around with, and most of the time they don't hook each other. They're side by side. But I decide to let go. You've still got your hook. You're still going to sort around this for a while, and eventually you'll realize you can't hook me and you'll stop. So too often I find in family systems and business systems that you're on your best behavior. You've done really good work. You're coming in and you're helping, and you've done it 3 times. And since it's not working, you've given up. 3 times is not enough. You're going to have to go repeatedly show that pattern so they can realize they can put their hooks down as well, and they will join you. It's just not as fast as you'd like.
Yeah, there's a concept Leslie Dash, you and I have talked about a bunch, where we always like to ideally be the third advisor to come into a system, because we feel like we call it the pickle jar. And it's like when you're passing the pickle jar around, and then it's, the grandmother at the table is the one who finally gets it open. There's like a cumulative effect that is almost difficult to get your hands on, and to be able to quantify. But as people continue to work on themselves as individuals, it can have this sort of like collective ripple that spreads outward. And sometimes people, at first, it may seem like your family members are just putting their hand up, disregarding what you say, or won't acknowledge something that you've brought to the table in terms of how you guys could approach communication more effectively. But if you continue to do it, as Natalie's talking about, what can happen is that over time, those folks may come back one day and start demonstrating that behavior because they've seen small examples of where it's had a positive impact. And so again, going back on each of us having the individual choice of whether or not we're inserting health or chaos into the system, we get to do that every day. And sometimes the process is what you have to trust more than focusing on an outcome.
Absolutely.
Natalie, let's talk about the TK.
Sure. So we talked about earlier, so this is called the Tolman-Kilman Index, and it's one of 2, problem-solving models. And I like to call it a problem-solving model intentionally, but it actually has to do with how we conflict, because conflict equals problem-solving. Remember nothing else from today, that's the thing to remember. And so there are these scales of whether we're assertive, which is I say what I have to say. Not that I think something and I don't say it and later I'm a little passive aggressive about it, or I complain that you didn't already know. Or not assertive, which is where I'm holding it in. It also has a variable of cooperative or uncooperative. That means I do it alone or I do it with you. And so assertive and uncooperative is competing. Now, we use all 5 of these in different ways. I use one up, I use one laterally, I use one down. A lot of competitors show up in leadership. It's actually how we excel. We get good grades, we're the top athlete. It's not a bad thing. Competitors are misunderstood in a way that I would describe as a golden retriever puppy. Golden retriever puppies sometimes knock over toddlers, but they're not awful. They're just trying to play. Competitors are loud and they want you to play with them. They're just trying to share ideas. And if Donnel and I were both competitors, which we're not, we could yell at each other, get a cool project done, and go have some beers together. And if we click forward, you can see the next box that goes in there, which is unassertive and uncooperative, right? So we were talking about assertive. Now we're saying, what does unassertive and uncooperative look like? It's avoiding. I don't want to know. I don't want to think about it. Some avoiders, and I've seen this happen in meetings, they inch away as it's happening slowly, slowly, slowly till their back's against the wall. Avoiders are saying, I just don't want to make this worse, so I'm not going to. Now, avoiding is good, right? If you celebrate Thanksgiving in the US, you should be avoiding the conflict at Thanksgiving dinner. Now, you shouldn't be avoiding the business conflict at the board meeting, right? The best thing to do with avoiders is a walk and talk. This across the table discussion is highly nerve-wracking for them. We can go to the next one. Then there's accommodating. This is where we're actually sliding over from uncooperative to cooperative. That's where I'm starting to increase my trust in you, but I'm having a hard time trusting me. And so whatever you want, whatever you think, Donnel, I'll do it. I'll get it done. It sounds really nice. People love accommodators at first, and accommodators love being accommodators at first. Unfortunately, every time I've said whatever you want, Donnel, I'm assuming he will notice that I've sacrificed for him. And he won't, and he doesn't. And so then I get really resentful. And so it sounds nice, it sounds good, but it ends up back working poorly later. We can go to the next one. This is what you heard probably early in your life, that we want to compromise. It's the best thing in the world. It's win-win. Actually, compromise is lose-lose. I take the best of my idea, the best of Donnell's idea, and we cut up both so much that something in the middle that is horrible happens and nobody's happy. And this is really saying, I'm trying to be assertive, I'm trying to be cooperative, but I'm not staying there completely all the time. And that's usually when it feels a little too hot in the kitchen. I was prepared to cook, but now it's too hot. I'll get out. And the last one is collaboration. Collaboration takes a lot of time. It is really emotionally exhausting. It absolutely is. It is all the best of Donnell's ideas while I'm questioning him to try to fully understand them. And then I'm going to hopefully edit some of the things I was thinking originally, say all the things I was thinking. He's going to question me a lot too. And we will create something else that may look completely different, that hopefully is new from all of us. I'm not saying that we should be collaborating all the time. There may need to be, in certain situations that are risky, you might need to have a competing role. We just need a decision that goes quickly. The question is, first, what's my style? And who do I use it with? And what are the unintended consequences of that, right? I said I was slow. I'm slow because I'm a collaborator. I want to get it right with as many opinions as possible. So you don't want to use collaboration when you're going fast. You don't want to use competing all the time, because then other people seem like they don't matter. If we click to the next slide, this really explains why, because we're talking about assertive and cooperative, but it also has to do with concern for self and concern for others, right? If I have a low concern for others and a high concern for myself, which is what competitors do behaviorally, even though it's not they don't love you, at some point in time, I'll know that he doesn't care about me. So I just will stop.
Yeah, I'm curious, Natalie, do you have a dominant style on this for yourself?
I do. I'm collaborative. I love to collaborate. And if we can't actually get somewhere, then I compete. So it almost feels like a two-punch. I'm going to lull you into cooperating with me, Donnell. We're going to do a great job together. But if it really gets to nonsense and you and I aren't making way, because I do like to be productive, then I'm just going to take it and do it myself. And so
Yeah.
that's the awareness, is we use technically all five, but we kind of have a two. And the two is tough because you shift from one to the other. For you, it makes sense. For me, it makes sense. But for the family members, it feels really tough at times, because I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. We'll talk about it till forever. And Donnell's like, I need till tomorrow morning. And I'm like, we really need it today, Donnell. And I'll say it like that. I'll say it nicely. And he's like, I just really need it till tomorrow. I'm like, I'd really like it today. And then I'm going to make the decision today at 5 o'clock. Donnell's going to think that we agreed to talking about it again tomorrow, but I'm not waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to be like collaborating is like my default, but then I go to compromising. And the one that's on the bottom for me is avoiding. And I was thinking about that, like avoiding. When is avoiding actually the most productive way to go at it? And with avoiding, sometimes if it's something that you just don't tend to do, it's at the bottom of the pile in these preferences. One of the things that I've noticed in my own life is that I may spend too much time on certain issues that really could just be let go for the sake of harmony and relationships. And I'm wondering if you have seen that kind of thing with clients that you work with.
I have. And, avoiding isn't terrible, and we hear it a lot in families. But if you look at this slide in particular, where it's low concern for self and low concern for others, sometimes avoiders, and I had this happen with a client, she saw this red flag in some of their business decisions. She was a minority shareholder, which doesn't really matter, but she saw this thing, but she didn't want to rock the boat, and she let it go and she let it go. And so there was some public backlash. to the company, and she's like, I could have told you that was going to happen. And everyone was like, well, why didn't you? And she's like, well, I didn't want to offend you. But when you avoid that feedback, you rob people of the ability to make that change. And so when we see this trend of avoiding, and we saw it in some of the comments that came through in the Q&A. If you really think about it, it's a low concern for other behavior. It might give you the gumption to actually say whatever it is that you need to say. Now, it doesn't mean people need to pick it up and do anything with it, but you should give them the benefit of the doubt of saying it.
So you have integrative and distributive on this chart as well. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so that integrative behavior is how we actually stay together, and distributive is how we push that out, right? Competers and accommodators kind of get things done. Collaborators and avoiders kind of bring things in, and they come together and compromise, right? If we talk about compromise, it's efficiency. And so these are the tensions in the model. And that's why you might need to use them. Like I said, Thanksgiving dinner is the time to avoid the confrontation, right? This is the time that we're going to be family. But if we need to make a decision, we should find a way that we can get more to distributive, because it's going to be closer to action. Or if we need more of our minds coming together, one of these integrative patterns like collaboration. And so first, know the model. We can send you tons of resources to read on it. You can even take the assessment and those kinds of things. But I think it's pulling the tools intentionally. I said this in the last webinar, and it's true for this one too. We're either doing this by default or by design. So it's okay that you may still, Donnel, be a collaborator and a compromiser, but you might want to say that. You might say, Natalie, I want tomorrow. I know you want today. I'm going to compromise. I'm not completely comfortable. I don't think you'll blow it up. Let's go with your opinion just for sake of work. So you just explicitly state that. And then I can decide if I want to let my competing go and say, you know what, Donna, I'd really like to get this done right. Why don't we wait till tomorrow? Because we both really do want to collaborate on this. And you're right, it does just take longer. And so I think that's call out just helps you move the needle a little bit. And it's neutral. You're not calling me slow, and I'm not calling you slow. Or you're not calling out when I am expeditious, which to you feels random because it is a switch. We're just using this language to describe that behavior.
Yeah. And so I'm in a family business, and I know that I tend to be one thing versus the other. And we're learning together about our different conflict styles as a family ownership team or a leadership team. What are the ways that teams can use this information in a practical manner to addressing a particular issue that comes up when it's pulling some people away from their defaults and into things that they maybe feel a little less skillful doing or a little less confident in doing?
Yeah, we'll send the handout after with the recap of this, but it goes through the pros and cons of each one of these and how to describe it. And what I have clients do with or without me is put these in the corners of the room, like most rooms have corners, and say, and then there's the one in the middle, and say, if you had to say how you behave at this job or on this team, pick the one you're doing. Go in there, go with that group. Besides the stuff you've already got in the cheat sheet, describe why that's useful. Describe what's great about it. What are the things we lose from that? And then you have them share that, and then ask them to go to the corner that they think would be the most useful, or the center, for how we should be making decisions. And then it doesn't change you as a human always, but when you can call out the meeting. So we're having our board meeting today. We really need to get this merger and acquisition done. So I'd love to spend some time making a collaborative decision, but at the end of the day, because we have to make an offer, we will have to get to competing if we really can't get to a consensus, right? So you help people come in saying, I know this is a stretch for some of you avoiders. We can sit next to each other. We can actually have a standing meeting, right? But we're going to try this way of problem solving together. And if someone does computers tend to get loud, right? And so if I start raising my voice or something, you can say, hey, that competing is showing. And right now we're collaborating. We will get to the action at the end of the day. So it's really useful. In fact, some clients actually have the word in the corner of their boardrooms. And so when they're deciding that they're switching in between, they go and they move to that.
Love that. So it's basically you're having the people sort of associate with this graph in a physical working space and even moving their bodies around a little bit to be really in touch with where they stand.
Yeah, and we have something called contextual memory too. So when you really do this thing where you go in the corners and you identify and you have this conversation, that can be a couple hours with people if you're really doing it, if you're really sharing and you're digging in. And if it's the same room that you have your meetings in, and you say, okay, we're collaborating, let's go to the collaborative corner. You actually can get in that mindset. You can embody it better. Now, I'm not saying all your meetings have to be walking around, but interestingly enough, it can change things if you do that.
Yeah, one of the things that came up for me when I was thinking about all of this leading up into the webinar is I was wondering about the way that other assessments interface with this one. So like if you have a group that's all done the DISC or you have a group that's all done the Myers-Briggs or something like that, how do these integrate? Do you intentionally mix the two together when working with groups?
Yeah, so the Thomas Kilmann is just when we're under stress and under conflict, but there are some corollaries, right? Like Ds tend to also be golden retriever puppies, tend to be misunderstood in ways, and a D and a computer will sometimes not give you credit for the idea, but get there. And so that's the misunderstood thing about computers or Ds or sometimes Es, specifically in EN. Hear all the information. They have a hard time admitting that it's yours, and you've won when they spit it out of their mouth. And so there are corollaries, but those are more behaviors for work styles. And this is more behavior around a problem specifically. They complement really well. You do see some very great corollaries. I do tend to encourage to have, that's the DISC or Myers-Briggs or what's called the descriptive assessment. I love descriptive assessments paired with something, whether it's a competency model or like this, which is a conflict index. And there are about 4 of them that exist. This one's just really simple, and it is one of the oldest. And if you get it from a place that has valid psychometrics, it makes it much stronger than some of these more new models.
Yeah, I almost wonder if that top one, that concern for others, if that, for those who are familiar with the Myers-Briggs, if that is like the T and F thing.
It can be, yes. I mean, accommodators tend to be F-y, right?
Yeah, and so just for those who aren't familiar with that, the T in the Myers-Briggs, when it comes to decision making, tends to focus on sort of outcome based factors and like objective outcomes, and the F tends to focus more on how is this going to impact the people who are involved.
Absolutely. Which could also be a DS link too, right? S is about safety, people. D is about getting the job done. And so, yes, there are corollaries. And the interesting thing about the TKI, because it's around problem solving or conflict, is you can appear different. Some people might be surprised that I'm a competer because sometimes you and I sound a lot alike. I think they'd both guess that we're collaborators. They might guess that we're both compromisers, but we're not. We could have the same DISC or we could have the same Myers-Briggs. I don't know. We haven't looked at each other's. But under this specific situation, we change because it's pressing, because that decision needs to happen.
Yeah. And now going back to the question of what do I do if nobody else is willing to participate in learning and development? How can somebody finding themselves in that position in a family group use this information to learn about themselves in ways that they can influence the broader system?
It's a great question. And it really depends on your level with discomfort. One of the things a lot of my clients have done when their family said, I'm never going to do this, is they say, okay, I'm going to pay for these things on my own. And I'm going to share that data. I'm going to share that report and share how I've grown from it. Others decide to bring it and do that small workshop and hopefully engage with people in that way. That other people are not participating in your family change is not a reason for you not to. Imagine a family of 5 people, 2 parents, 3 kids. The 3 kids decide to change and the 2 parents don't, and they each change 5%. That's still a 15% change in the system. You can change the system by doing your individual work, and it may feel lonely at first, but that doesn't mean it's not still working. How would you say to use it when you've got a tough family?
Yeah, I think about that. It's another thing of Joe's was talking about how family systems are a lot like a mobile over a baby's crib. And that if you move one piece, it does that, right? And so it all shifts and gets, out of balance. And it's the desire, sort of the inherent unconscious desire of the family system to be in balance. And so what I have found is that when people make a positive move that throws the system out of balance, but it's something that is promoting health, not chaos. If they hold to it long enough, that becomes the contagious thing that helps it balance at that new point where everybody moves in towards health. If they don't hold to it because they aren't taking the learning in a way that's meaningful and becomes a part of who they are, then sometimes the system will just balance back with them moving back out away from their position. And so I just genuinely believe that, I've seen it many times being contacted from family businesses where there's one person who really wants to change and nobody else will. And in that moment, there might be no way to move forward as a system. In an obvious way, like getting everyone together and doing some kind of workshop or visioning piece. But if where I've seen the individual make a concerted effort to grow themselves, oftentimes there's 12 to 16 months or 2 years down the road where they're reaching back out and saying, something's changed in my family, not quite sure what it is, but they're ready to sit down.
Yeah.
And I like to believe that is that individual's commitment to growth and personal development had a healthy influence that was undeniable to all those around them that were looking. And sometimes people won't give you the satisfaction of saying, that's a good idea, or I hear you, but they do. And it becomes part of what they think about as they leave the conversation or are moving on to other things. It's like a little kid with our kids when we give them an idea for how they can approach something and they're like, Dad, that's stupid. But then, a week later, they're like, I got this great idea. And so we're kind of working
Exactly.
on that family dynamic, but bringing it into the adults and the family business.
And I get it. You may think you're the only one being the bigger person. I promise you, if we were to actually observe your whole family, there are moments where everyone's been the bigger person. Maybe not consistently, but what we find is that people want to hold their breath. If we're all holding our breath, we're just going to pass out, right? You want to be the first person to breathe, and they will see it. It's absolutely true. And they will start catching on to some of it as well. I teach this critical thinking class, and we have this exercise where I have these clients talk about the one chore they and their partner fight over the most, and then to just kind of laugh about it, not get mad, and just do it. Don't ask them to do it. And the students have to do this for a few weeks and they write a paper on it. But I've actually had some people call me and say that they've saved their marriage. And guess what? Their spouse is now loading the dishwasher. Because sometimes that rebellion is, I just don't want you to tell me what to do. But if you're not taking the bait and you're not nagging me and you're actually doing it, now I feel empathy towards you. I actually remember that I like and love you. Remember, if we go back to that first thing we talked about, interpersonal relational conflict usually isn't a thing on its own. It's based on something else. So my constantly reminding Donnel, are you coming? Are you coming via text is probably the reason he doesn't want to come, right?
Yep.
He might not admit that. He might not know it. I might not know it, but we're complicit in creating that pattern together.
Yeah. And I think you bring us to a point where it's also worth mentioning this. A lot of times the intensity of conflict can give you a read on, how deep that interpersonal side of it might be. So if somebody is reacting to something that you did that seems disproportionate in terms of the level of response they gave, that oftentimes is a strong indicator that there's something beneath the surface that is really significant for them that's impacting the strength of their response.
Absolutely. So we have about 5 minutes left. If you guys
Yeah.
want to drop your last minute questions in the Q&A, if not, Donnel and I can talk forever about conflict, but I hope you think of it as a problem solving, right? We're managing our differences as a group because we're different people. It is good that we're different, right? Even Donnel and I, who've done at least a few of these together, who've been friends for almost a decade, if not more, I can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have a diversity between us. And if we didn't, what would be the point of listening to the two of us talk about this in different ways? You could just talk to one of us. And I think if you can apply that same logic to your family, that difference, although at first it's surprising, it doesn't have to be bad unless I decide it's bad.
Yeah. And I would add that just like our best on any given day varies depending on how much sleep we got, or how much stress we have, how many things we're facing, or how good things are going. It's like we've got to extend that benefit of the doubt thing outwards that everybody's doing their best in any given moment and thinking about, okay, so what do we do with that when people aren't showing up in ways that seem terrific? How can we be compassionate and open to the idea of finding another way of discussing something so that there actually is a productive and caring outcome?
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to say is someone put a comment in early on of why they avoid conflict, and it said that it might not be resolved the way that I want. That's true. I usually have this chart that talks about whether we should have dogs or cats, or whether we should have chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream, because one of us is a psycho and one's not, right? Um, that's a position. But if you really go through the whole chart that I have of things, is if you have a cat or a dog, you want a pet. If you want ice cream, it's because ice cream is delicious. If you want a beach vacation or a mountain ski vacation, it's still that you want to spend time together. When we really dissect conflict, we find that our interests are more common than the position. The position is yes or no. I want to raise, or we can't afford a raise. The interest for both is probably that I want you to develop, right? And if I develop you by maybe sending you to trainings, I might not be able to pay for your pay rise right now. But you think you might not get the positional answer that you're looking for. You may still have the interest that someone else has. So being clear on what that interest is much more effective.
Natalie, there's a couple of comments, some talking about not sure how emotions or tone of conversation will go. And then someone wrote, having come from corporate America back into family business, how can you make it easier to remain professional with all the family emotions and history?
Yeah, we talked about that contextual memory. There's also something called associative regression. There's a way our brain works with our family members that don't work with other people. So really practicing individuation, really practicing some self-soothing strategies. If you don't have a coach to support you with that, looking into that, um, that you feel emotional with your family makes sense. It is an emotional system. It is tough. It is hard. It is not also in some ways, unless you're being really aggressive or mean, inappropriate, because it is inherently emotional. So I don't know if it's your own discomfort of people displaying that to you, or the fact that it's showing up for you.
And I will add one last comment on that too. With the idea of a coach, working with a coach, you can do things like the Hogan and learning how to understand your own motives and values and drivers, and then looking at how to leverage those to get to that emotional sensitivity place if that's hard for you.
Yeah, there's also an emotional reactivity assessment. There's a bunch of ways to do it, but you've got to understand why you're uncomfortable to begin with and what's coming up for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. I want to thank Natalie and Donnel. Clearly, you guys could talk and share great content and great ideas with everyone for quite a while. I want to thank you both very much. I want to thank all of the webinar participants. And I'd love to see all the activity in the Q&A. That was great. We have a more interactive session, which is our Coffee with Leslie. That'll be on May 15th, coming up soon. Please feel free to forward our emails that you're getting through MailChimp. And if you found us a different way, let us know. We'll put you on our mailing list. We have another webinar coming up on June 3rd, which will be about vision and values in your family and in your business. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.